Francis Ngannou's departure from the UFC has sent shockwaves through the MMA world. Fans are now wondering what went wrong in his contract negotiations with the UFC, and whether they'll ever see the Predator back in the octagon. As one of the most terrifying fighters to ever step into the ring, Francis Ngannou's departure leaves a gaping hole in the UFC's roster, and has everyone asking, what really happened behind the scenes? On January 14th, the UFC's worst nightmare became a reality as one of their most dominant champions, Francis Ngannou, became a free agent.
You're going to fight arguably the greatest fighter of all time. You'd be the highest paid heavyweight ever in UFC history. Or you think there's more money out there to fight somebody who isn't the greatest of all time, somebody who is a lesser opponent.
While fans have been used to seeing fighters come and go, Francis Ngannou's departure was a shocker, as he was widely regarded as one of the best fighters on the planet. UFC president Dana White claimed that the promotion offered a deal that would make Francis the highest paid heavyweight in UFC history. Still, he stated that Francis's demands were unreasonable, and that he was looking for easier fights for more money. This made fans wonder whether this was the real reason behind the split, or just Dana's PR spin, but the whole situation became clear when Francis spoke out. Dana White didn't tell the entire story. Francis Ngannou has provided his own perspective on the events leading up to his departure from the promotion. In an interview with journalist Ariel Helwani, Francis addressed a number of topics.
His interpretation was that your ego is out of control just because you said, let's just focus on this fight and go one fight at a time. That was what led him to say what he said at that press conference in July of 2018.
Francis confirmed that he was offered around $8 million for his fight against Jon Jones, a sum which was reportedly in the same ballpark as the amount Brock Lesnar received for UFC 200. However, he made it clear that his decision to turn down the offer was not solely about money. Instead, Francis stated that he had a number of demands relating to fighter rights and welfare that he wanted to see addressed by the UFC. One of Francis's key demands was for fighters to have greater control over their own sponsorships. Under the current system, fighters are not permitted to have personal sponsors and must instead rely on the UFC's own sponsor network. Francis argued that this system was unfair and that fighters should be allowed to secure their own sponsorships. Another issue that Francis raised was the lack of health insurance for fighters. Unlike other professional sports leagues, the UFC does not provide health insurance for its fighters. Francis felt that this was unacceptable and called on the UFC to provide better medical care and support for its athletes. Perhaps most significantly, Francis also demanded that a fighter be appointed to the UFC's board of directors with the mandate to represent the interests of the fighters. Francis felt that this was essential in order to ensure that fighters had a voice within the organization and that their concerns were taken seriously. Despite the UFC's refusal to entertain these demands, Francis remained steadfast in his position. He felt that the offer from the UFC was an attempt to buy his silence, and that by accepting it, he would be handing over too much power and control over his career. Francis stated, "I felt like at some point I was slapped in the face with money, and they were like, take the money and shut up. That didn't work. In that contract, I have no rights, I have no power. I hand over all the power to you guys, and I have seen in the past how you guys can use your power over me, and I don't want that to happen again." Many fighters, fans, and analysts have criticized the promotion for spreading a false narrative about Francis's departure. Gray Maynard, a former UFC lightweight contender who fought for the promotion between 2007 and 2018, took to Twitter to expose the UFC's attempts to defame fighters who leave the organization. He claims that whenever fighters demand more pay, want a better contract, or test free agency, the UFC portrays them as scared to fight. Maynard also proclaimed that the UFC expects fighters to accept whatever offer they are given, and anyone who tries to negotiate better terms is viewed negatively by the promotion. Maynard added that the UFC portrays fighters who accept their terms as loving to fight, and a scary matchup for anyone. Also, John McCarthy, a former UFC referee and current Bellator commentator, also criticized UFC for spreading the idea that Francis Ngannou is avoiding competitive fights. He wrote on his Twitter account, "Simply put, Francis Ngannou did not get released by the UFC. He fought out his contract while still being the heavyweight champion. Make no mistake, Francis in no way is afraid of anyone fighting in the UFC. He is a man of extraordinary courage who stands for his beliefs. Former UFC champion Eddie Alvarez also took to social media and gave his opinion on how the UFC is trying to switch the narrative by making it appear like Francis did not want to fight. He tweeted, "UFC simply lost the bid for Francis, and instead of admitting that, they go with the narrative that the scariest alive is afraid to fight in the UFC? Ha! These jokes write themselves. Hashtag PHS unreal." Another issue that has caused Francis Ngannou to end up at an impasse with the UFC when it comes to signing a new deal is apparently his wish to box professionally. Ever since Conor McGregor stepped into the boxing ring to face Floyd Mayweather in a mega fight in 2017, a number of UFC fighters have expressed an interest in switching sports, and it's unsurprising that Francis is amongst them. After all, more money can be made in the boxing ring than in MMA, even at the top of the UFC. That's largely because of the differences in how the two sports are promoted. A super fight with someone like Tyson Fury or Anthony Joshua would undoubtedly net the Predator untold millions. There's a huge possibility Francis and Fury could share the boxing ring in 2023, but for the time being, Fury is busy preparing for Alexander Usyk. Safe to say, UFC probably wanted a monopoly for its heavyweight champion, and the contract negotiation did not go the way Francis wanted. While it's one way to put it that he was offered a lot of money, the true story is that he probably wasn't offered the ability to box. With Francis Ngannou now free to go wherever he wants and do whatever he wants, the MMA world is eagerly awaiting to see where Francis will head to.